Всем привет! Я надеюсь, что народ сейчас еще подойдет после кофе-брейка и нас станет немножко побольше, потому что пока как-то слишком много свободных мест. Но, тем не менее, мы должны начинать. Меня зовут Никита Шерман, я представляю компанию Game Insight, и мы являемся в каком-то роде хозяевами киберспортивного трека. И я готов представить нашего первого гостя, которым является мистер Шон Чарльз из компании ESL, пожалуй, крупнейшей киберспортивной организации в мире. Шон, welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me. As Nick was kind enough to say, I work for ESL. And I look after our global games publishing business, which obviously sits very close to what a lot of you people are doing here in the room. With ESL, obviously, we've been forging for a long time on the road to esports glory. And today we'll talk a little bit about how esports currently stands in the marketplace, what's going on, trends, look at it, and kind of what's to come. Always start with our humble beginnings. I'm sure that everybody in this room has some sort of memory of whether it's playing Mario Kart next to a brother or a sister or a friend, or standing in an arcade playing Double Dragon, or as far as just any game where you can put a high score down and compare to somebody else. That's essentially the start of esports. So basically, as long as there's been gaming, people have been congregating together to play games and show off they're better than somebody else, the social element of playing games. And ultimately here, this was esports. The only problem is nobody knew about it. If you weren't in that room, you didn't get to see it. And beyond this picture, there isn't really a lot of legacy there. But we'll look at that coming shortly. So kind of where are we now? At the moment, esports is in a massive boom growth. Everybody's always believed that this vision will always be a hockey stick moment and always have that immediate rise, which we're seeing across the board. If we look now at just the numbers of gamers in the world, it's increasing. Here it's said by 5%, whether it's Nielsen or whoever puts together the numbers, it continues to grow and we continue to see a healthy growth in there. What's really most interesting, and I'm not going to just read off this slide, is the spend. Obviously, we don't work for UNICEF. Everybody here is trying to make this into a business and turns into some sort of way that it monetizes, whether it's somebody playing a game, whether it's somebody spectating a game, watching, consuming, anything around the game. And that's where when we see these really large numbers in the next 2 years going up on those kind of metrics, that's what excites the whole ecosystem around esports. Because just wanting to play games against one another is fun, but it's that turning into a business that really grows where we are now and grows and moves the ecosystem.
Der kommt an! Mach ihn! Mach ihn! Er macht ihn! Mario!
I'm a huge soccer fan, but this was way bigger than Real Madrid winning their 10th Champions League.
This is the most intense game I ever watched.
This was like 4 hours of nail-biting, emotionally roller coaster ride. That was like the closest match ever.
My nickname is Expeke. Poland, Katowice was the moment that my career just skyrocketed. When I did the famous backdoor move, at that time I didn't think more than thanks to this we won, but after looking at it and everything it brought, I realized that I made something that is gonna be there forever.
Nip are patient. They lie in wait. They've waited practically a year for this moment.
There's a moment I really do remember. It is 2014 ES1 Cologne, the 21st of August at Gamescom.
16-13! It finally happens!
Get Right has been working years to win that major, and it's unforgettable.
We have our champions! The best team in the world!
So pretty powerful stuff there. I think everybody can feel that kind of excitement. They can look at something, see people cheering and see, okay, it's come a long way from somebody gathered together in a hotel lobby, playing against one another, sitting on the couch side by side to where we are at the moment. What does that essentially mean What does that essentially mean? We are trying to align the vision of esports along with the same line that you just saw there. In most competitive games, whether it's boxing, whether it's football, you'll see people that come in that have particular talent, particular skills, can move the system, can excite people, can drive emotion so that people go home and want to relive that themselves. They have that ambition to reach that same level. When somebody sees Michael Jordan dunk, they think, can I dunk in that same way? That same is true of gaming. When you see somebody play at a high level, we saw there the example of the Expeke backdoor. This was a moment that lives in League of Legends infancy. Forever and ever, people will remember this moment that somebody with 1 bar of health jumped around the Nexus while somebody chased them, and they ended up winning and winning it all. Those kind of moments are the same as a knockout punch or a great goal in football. That's what we're looking for. So in esports, in order to do that, we had to create essentially 4 areas in order for it to really grow. Obviously, the arena speaks for itself. We need to have a place where people come together and celebrate. Because when people join together in the same, whether it's an online community or actually in the flesh, standing together in a stadium, that cheering, that camaraderie, that chanting together, that feeling of that very, let's say, almost primal connection to somebody else that has the same love for something that you do is in the essence. That leads us straight to the fans. That's why they're coming together there. But what brings them there? The stars, and building up those personalities, those people who actually will be able to move the needle, whether it be speaking online, whether it be them following in a social media platform. They actually do a lot of the work of telling the story. We want them to be the mouthpiece of esports, because the more that people see them having success, enjoying themselves, living the dream, so to speak, that fuels the next wave of people that want to come in and be part of that ecosystem. And then ultimately, what a lot of people here are involved with is actually making the game. The game is the pitch. We essentially want to create the next version of badminton, the next version of table tennis, the next version of chess. We're looking for all of those archetypes, but also in the gaming universe, whether that's on a mobile platform, on the PC, on Xbox, it doesn't matter. We're just looking for that pitch to be created, because once that pitch is created, then we'll see stars rising up. The stars will bring fans, and we'll come back and we'll all unite together in the arena. And that's truly the ecosystem that we're moving forward at the moment. Now, arena talk. Very simply put, back in 2013, it was still an unknown entity. People sat around and said, how many people can we really get in a room and that all stare at a screen together and get excited about this esports, about watching somebody else play? We've all heard those sound bites of people, that the naysayers, sitting there going, I can't believe it. Why would you watch somebody play video games? Why would my cousin watch somebody build Lego? We don't know until we know. Right now, people have an appetite for watching that and watching other people compete for the same reasons that we just spoke about. And the norm is now becoming large stadium arenas where we're meeting fans that are coming together. But the important part is the amount of spectators that we can bring and we can move per year, the amount of live sessions, people that tune in, that want to watch something live as they would spectate, and ultimately, how many people do we reach uniquely? And all of those parts, again, move that ecosystem forward, because that will drive what we were talking about before, that spend. Because ultimately, it is a business, and there are a lot of people that are looking at those numbers and saying, I'm interested in how do I connect with those people. So what moves the needle at the moment? We can see some big numbers here of hours watched. Choosing hours watched because that means how long we have somebody's captive engagement. And these are big numbers you can see across a lot of the titles that I think everybody will recognize and know. You really see some massive growth numbers, and it spans across a lot of different genres, which in essence, esports is just a collection term. It's the same as me saying, I like outdoor activity. Outdoor activity could be kayaking, climbing, abseiling, spelunking. There's so many different ways of spending your time outside. The same way saying, I like to play a video game can span you from a battle royale to a MOBA to coming back to a card game. Each one of them sit in that archetype of esports, but they're incredibly different, the same way that the nuances between ice hockey and field hockey, both are in the Olympics. Both have professional athletes, both have huge amounts of sponsorship around them with stars that are, to their own right, complete gods, but the nuances are very different. In ice hockey, throw my gloves off and punch you, completely fine. That's an exciting moment. If the same thing happened in field hockey, people would be pretty upset. Now, those same nuances come back in the gaming world. What becomes even more interesting is how we see that this next level moves as the digital generation moves the way they consume media. Whereas even 5 years ago, when esports was in its growth, still really looking to find its feet, and it's absolutely not reached any kind of top plateau, we were seeing that platforms and the way that platforms worked really played an important role. And as we see now, the mobile platform really grows in terms of its computing power in the way that the developers are being able to harness that. We're seeing that a much more legitimate experience starts to grow on the mobile platform. And we can see here, for example, in some of the more esports core titles that are more recognizable in those pillars of titles that I showed on the last slide, we can now see that there's also an element that comes into more accessible, because one of the great things about the mobile phone is that you now have access to everybody, because I don't think there's anybody in this room who doesn't have some sort of smartphone in their pocket at the moment that can run a game to some sort of extent. That's a very different step than us trying to convince people to buy a bleeding-edge PC in order to download a game like Counter-Strike and play it at a decent level and a decent experience. With let's say, the advent of 5G coming, this will only get stronger, because the experience and the connectivity between players, the latency, will become really something that will allow us to blow open the doors and really have the most accessible audience. Looking at the current ecosystem and where ESL sits in that, very simply, we are a league operator. So we use here the examples of standing shoulder to shoulder with the peers like the NFL, the NBA. We are creating the world that it sits in. But what's really changed is now with governing bodies like WESA and the Esports Integrity Coalition, you now see that the evolution comes from people sitting around and kind of self-governing to now there being standalone bodies. And that's very important for how the actual sport evolves, because when you look at it from the standpoint of a Coca-Cola, they want to see that there is integrity. They want to see that there is a governing body, that there is organization, because their brand is too big to connect to something that doesn't feel like it's being policed, controlled, monitored and observed in the right way. And the last thing they want is scandal or confusion or outrage, or, as we all know, an angry thread on Reddit. Those kind of steps legitimize and start to build a much more healthier ecosystem for esports. Then we see what really has moved esports into the next phase, which is how people are consuming esports. There's some examples right here which we'll go through. Obviously, virtual reality. I think we all understand that that's just giving us a very new lens on how we see things. But the side of original content and platforms like Hulu and Netflix wanting to tell the story of these athletes, these cyber athletes, in the same way that they would want to tell stories about a pro footballer or an NFL player is a very important step to growing out the way that we consume esports and how this space really becomes something that now becomes more legitimate and becomes more sit up and take notice for so many different parts of our world. Then, of course, you have the linear distribution channels, but, of course, where really the movement happens is in the streaming platform. With the advent and the rise of Twitch, this was really a game changer in terms of how people could watch. If we think back to that first slide where we saw people playing Space Invaders, I believe it was, in a hotel lobby in 1981, they were doing a great job. Everything they did was exciting, meaningful, and was worthwhile. The only problem was nobody outside of that room could watch them or be involved. Twitch, for example, or Mixer, or Facebook, or Caffeine TV give us the chance to each become our own broadcast platform. So this sport, this ecosystem, this world where people were sat playing on their own, choosing to play side by side as I did in Mario Kart on a Saturday morning, that just lived on that Saturday morning. Now you could share that with the rest of the world. And if what you're doing is interesting enough, the world will watch and take notice. And that will drive the story that you have to tell. So being able to give everybody the selfie media lens, that they have their own story, has been able to propel esports. And has been the first sport that really embraces this idea of everybody has a voice, everybody has a reason to be there, everybody can speak for themselves. And that's very true and fitting with the digital native that we're all trying to address, companies are trying to approach. So what does that really mean? And I think without going again into too much detail here, we know that the audience that we're having is incredibly switched on, they're incredibly digital native, they have a high consuming rate of online content, and very importantly, they're young and they have a lot of spend wallet. And while that sounds like I'm the terrible money-grubbing, evil overlord, that's absolutely not the case. It's just the reality that this is an audience that everybody is interested in attaching themselves to. So as long as that audience has attached itself to esports, there becomes a symbiotic relationship that esports is a platform, and there are very few platforms where you can reach this audience in a legitimate and believable way. And that's something which I think really resonates when we look at the next slide, where we see some examples here of other, let's say, large franchises, large leagues, large operating systems, and we see that their age growth is actually rising. And only in the case of the World Tennis Association, with the average age of 55, that's having a reduction of 8, everybody else has this kind of growth and is finding a hard time to give the power to the people within their ecosystem that need to share their voice and share what they're talking about, share what they're looking to tell that audience. And because esports and social media have gone so hand in hand, both in terms of growth and in terms of that audience picking it up and using it, we have a real position there in which there's a lot of movement in terms of how do we emancipate, how do we drive, and how do we grow this large audience and make them become the ambassadors that tell the story and want to feel connected and proud to be part of competitive gaming. One slide is self-promotion. It would be bad if I didn't do it, but I have to. Very simply put, when we started working on ESL, we're talking about 2001, 1997. Those were really the early days. To be able to now look at something as simple as, let's say, the influential sport brands and see us right there next to a Red Bull, you know, one spot above Chelsea, 2 spots above Formula One, is a really exciting moment for us and really shows that the ecosystem of esports is really having a profound effect and really turning people's heads and getting them involved in how they can see and how they can move this audience and how it becomes a legitimate and exciting way to talk to millennials. Again, what's really driven that for us is how do we go out and create something that, just like esports, has very little barrier to entry. Mobile will give us a huge increase of player base because naturally it's something, as I said before, that resides in everybody's pocket already, and it's something that you can do at any place, time. So that will naturally grow. The second part is taking something and making it localized. As we understand, everybody has their own nuances and differences of their cultures, of the way they want to play, what might resonate in one territory and what might work in another. Together with, for example, DreamHack and different programs like the Intel Extreme Masters and ESL 1, we're trying to take that message and show people from all different parts of the globe that they have a home and they have a place to be welcome and enjoy and express themselves within the world of esports. That's really something that's very important and core at the essence of ESL, and I think for all the organizers out there is to find a way that we open this up to as many people and give them as much chance as possible for the following reason. Very simply, casual is the widest amount of people we want to have at the moment. So if we think about the example of, let's say, a classic element like football, I want every kid 5 years old to go out and kick a football because they're going to see whether they like it. 6 years old, they're going to play it some more, 7, 8, 9. If they're really into it at some point, they'll say, I want to play some sort of organized park game, which is perfect. Let's say then they're 14, 15, 16, they actually want to join some sort of club, whether it be with their school, whether it be a community. Now they have a shirt, they have their name on the back. They're playing in kind of an amateur first start of their step. If that moves from there, by the time they're 18, in Dutch we call it aspirante, that means you're moving into the kind of the more senior side of play, and it's becoming more organized. You could see somebody saying, right, I'm rising out of the amateur and I'm going into a semi-pro or pro level, playing on a 4th division team or a 3rd division team in whatever territory, where you rise into actual champions, actual real competition, really crowning victories. And if, of course, that group, getting smaller and smaller as we go, is now looking for people who are going to be called up and play for the Russian national team. And those are going to play at the pinnacle of everything to compete on the highest stage, on a World Cup, in all sorts of elements, which would be then at the legendary top. So we needed to have every kid play at 5 in order to find the 11 men that represented at the top. And that's really what the ecosystem of esports is very, very important about, is this bottom-up growth where we cover all geographies, all levels, all games, and all platforms, because we essentially want everybody to come in and have a go. So the idea of taking your mobile phone out and being able to play a game like Guns of Boom and play it immediately and have an immediate feedback experience to say, I want to do this again, I'm enjoying this, is so crucial to the growth of esports. And as that game evolves, as that platform evolves, and as the accessibility, the speed, 5G, etc., you'll see that really having a profound effect on how many people are able to take part. I have to ask you guys if you want some questions.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you.